Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath with Forbes Breaking News. Thousands of dock workers at ports stretching from Maine to Texas went on strike at midnight on Tuesday over stalled labor negotiations with the U.S. Maritime Alliance. Here to explain what this historic strike means is Harley Shaiken. He is a professor emeritus at Berkeley who specializes in labor and the economy. Harley, thank you so much for being here.
Very nice to be here.
So let's put this strike in context. This is the first time since 1977 that eastern U.S. ports have gone on strike. What led us to this moment?
You're right. This is truly historic since it's been almost 5 decades since we've seen the last strike. This has also been unusual because the two sides stopped meeting face to face way back in June when there was a dispute over automation at a single port. They've since communicated in various ways, but not face to face, which is unusual in a strike where the stakes are this high. And now everyone's on the picket line, and we're going to see where this goes.
They haven't negotiated face to face since June. So did that basically guarantee a strike? Did they give up on meeting in the middle back in June?
They appeared to have. They've gone through some motions, and the Biden administration has been very involved, not in mediating the strike, but in separately speaking to both sides, and I suspect saying the urgency of getting this settled for the U.S. economy. But much beyond that, there's no substitute for face-to-face negotiations, particularly as you near the end game. Now, the only movement occurred several days ago when the Employers Association, the U.S. Maritime Alliance, upped the financial offer from 40% over 6 years to 50%. A significant movement, but the union rejected it because they're asking for 77% over 6 years, $5 a year for each of the next 6 years towards the hourly salary. One of the things that they've pressed that is also unusual is the union has said, we're not going to meet face to face until you meet our financial demands, and then we can talk about the other issues, most prominently automation, and I suspect work rule issues. Again, that's an unusual approach.
So wages are a huge issue. The union wants a 77% increase, and U.S. Maritime Alliance is offering 50%, so they haven't quite reached a compromise there. What are the other issues that have led to these negotiations stalling?
A huge issue is automation. This has been a major issue in many industries, particularly in longshore related things. The union is concerned that the advent of new technologies, and now particularly artificial intelligence in various relations to the vehicles used to unload ships and how they're unloaded, they want to get this under control and essentially freeze it. That is, to, by and large, make it very difficult to introduce new technologies. Needless to say, the employers are going in a different direction. This is a very different approach than was used by the ILWU, the Longshore Workers Union on the West Coast, which is a separate entity, way back in 1957 when containers were first introduced. The legendary and very left-wing leader of the ILWU, Harry Bridges, made the decision that the union would not be able to stop containerization, so they would accept it, but drew up ways that their members would financially benefit from the automation of the industry. And now the ILA on the East Coast is saying, no, we want to freeze the automation. So that's another very contentious issue that they're not fully discussing right now and won't, according to the union, until they get a settlement on the financial dimensions.
I see. So wages first, then the effects of AI. This feels like it could stretch on for many weeks. What is your assessment of how long it will take both sides to come to the table and reach a bargain on all the issues on the table?
This is very difficult to predict. Actually, it's easy to predict, difficult to predict reliably, but we can look at certain patterns. All parties have, that is, who are being economically affected, have stockpiled a lot of goods, particularly non-perishable goods, to weather a 1 week, possibly a 2 week strike without much damage to the broader economy in general and consumers in particular. There is already significant damage to shipping companies because you've got ships tied up, you've got 100,000 containers sitting on New York, New Jersey ports. So you've got that. But basically, a lot of the cost of the strike has been paid for by this stockpiling and by the measures that have been taken. So for a week or two, fine. Beyond that, you start getting into shortages, much higher shipping costs, and a whole bunch of other things that spill over into the broader economy. That's true, that would be true in any year, but this year we are 5 weeks away from a presidential election that by all accounts is very tight, particularly in 7 swing states that are likely to decide this race. So once it goes past 2 weeks, let's say, and the pain begins to be felt in a more generalized way, it will clearly have an impact on the presidential race, and it will definitely be damaging to Kamala Harris, the vice president, because the incumbent administration is going to be saddled with a lot of blame. And I think Donald Trump will rush to do that.
It will definitely be damaging for Vice President Kamala Harris. Is this a no-win situation for her and President Biden? Because there's past precedent of a president getting involved in labor relations. That, of course, is President Jimmy Carter, who is celebrating his 100th birthday today. And that had severe political ramifications for when he got involved. So can you talk about the potentially no-win situation that the administration is in right now?
It's not quite a no-win situation because they've been doing a lot that's below the radar. There's been a major push from labor in general and the ILA in particular for the Biden administration not to be involved. What they mean by that, they don't want the administration at the table, and they certainly don't want Taft-Hartley invoked. President Biden has said he doesn't believe in Taft-Hartley. He believes in collective bargaining. So that's off the table, at least for now. But what he has done is he's had Julie Su, the acting Secretary of Labor, and Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, both involved in separately talking to each side. The Longshore Union, the president there is Harold Daggett, has raved positively about Julie Su's work so far. So a lot of what they've been doing is below the radar, but it could bring us closer than it is publicly known or understood at this point to a settlement. So if this settles within a week or so, the Biden administration will positively be getting some credit for that. It's only if it goes on longer that it becomes more unpredictable and likely damaging.
Likely damaging for President Biden, Vice President Harris. But I also want to ask you about Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, because this, of course, is not the only supply chain disruption or potential supply chain disruption we have seen during the Biden administration. Everyone who was alive and awake during the pandemic remembers those goods, essential goods shortages, those empty shelves at the grocery store. How does this affect Buttigieg and his legacy?
This, I think, could prove positive because they learn, Pete Buttigieg in particular, Julie Su certainly, and the Biden administration learned a lot from the experience of what took place with the pandemic, where there were disastrous results because the scale and impact of it was in fact underestimated. So this time around, what they've learned from there has already been implemented in terms of what firms have done, stockpiling, what shipping firms and the ports have done, and also what the government has done. But you can't shield all of the damage, and the longer it goes, the costlier it goes. We have a wide range of estimates on the cost. They range from $500 million a day. That's a lot of money for the economy to be losing, to $5 billion a day, which is 10 times as much. So the financial damages will be somewhere in there, and that could weigh on the economy, on inflation as prices rise because of scarcity, and also the additional costs to transport things longer distances and in a far less efficient way.
$500 million a day to $5 billion a day could be the economic toll of this strike. That is tremendous. And I just want to drill down a little bit more on the potential political ramifications for Vice President Harris and the 2024 presidential election. The ILA is part of the AFL-CIO, correct?
Yes.
And how have both of these organizations treated her candidacy? Have they endorsed her? Because I know her appeal to unions has been in question this election season.
Well, actually, unions have overwhelmingly endorsed Kamala Harris, starting with the largest federation, the AFL-CIO. They have enthusiastically endorsed her and put considerable resources and all their skills trying to ensure that she wins. Other unions like the United Auto Workers have really stood out in terms of their enthusiasm and what they're putting into the race. The ILA has remained to date neutral on the presidential race. So it's one of very few unions that have done that. The other major one that has, of course, is the Teamsters. And beyond the neutrality, the president of the ILA, Harold Doggett, knows Donald Trump. They're the same age, way back and from Queens, and has had a relationship with him over the years. He met with him at Mar-a-Lago last November. And he came out of that meeting saying he told President Trump about the problems the union had in the industry. And President Trump was very sympathetic and said he would work with the union to stop automation. The president repeated that in June when the talks started breaking off in person. So, first of all, that is almost entirely a false promise. You couldn't take it to the bank on any level, and the ability or the desire of Donald Trump to try to hold automation in any industry, let alone longshore, is very questionable. But it made an impression on the president. So the fact that there hasn't been an endorsement isn't really been talked about very much, but it's there below the surface here.
There are some complicated dynamics here because, of course, Teamsters, as you said, has not made an endorsement at the top level, but it has been pointed out that local chapters of Teamsters and individual Teamsters have perhaps indicated their own support for either Vice President Harris or former President Trump in one way or another. But moving away from the political implications, I want to get to the consumer implications, that $500 million to $5 billion a day impact. Those are big numbers, but what does it mean for everyday Americans, especially those of us who live on the East Coast and depend on the goods, perishable and not, that come through our ports? How fast will we see the effects of this? I know you said that there was some stockpiling that happened, so it sounds like there could be a bit of a delay. It won't be an immediate effect, but take us through. What will it look like at the grocery store? What will it look like at Target if this continues for a week, 2, or 3?
Well, thanks to all the experience of the pandemic, that impact will be minimized. First of all, on critical things such as pharmaceuticals, much of those travel by air, so they won't be directly impacted. For non-perishable goods, that's where a lot of stockpiling has taken place, so that may last for several weeks at least. But when it comes to perishable things like bananas and some other fruits, after about a week, it's going to be very difficult because there aren't alternative ways to transport them, particularly on short notice. But all the efforts that are going to be made to keep the logistics chain running is going to put a pressure on that and raise prices for transportation. And that will no doubt be passed on to consumers. So this, if it lasts long, could feed into inflation. We don't have much of a record of strikes of the ILA and these ports, except that if we go back to the last strike almost 50 years ago, that one lasted 6 weeks. I'm not remotely saying this one is going to last 6 weeks, because that would create a lot of cost and a lot of damage, but that would take us through the election. And that means an angry, increasingly impacted electorate voting while this is taking place. So that is one of the wild cards that's here and really puts the pressure to gain a quick settlement. That is very possible. It has been said, certainly by the union, but by others as well, that the industry has earned a phenomenal amount of money in recent years. One figure that was indicated recently is that $400 billion were brought in by the port operators and shipping companies on the East Coast between 1920 and 1923. That is more money than was brought in since the introduction of containerization in 1957 through the year 2000. So there has been a lot of money earned. There will be costs associated with the strike that aren't directly recuperable. For example, it's one thing when you disrupt logistics, but in an industry of this complexity, it's very costly and time consuming to get things back to normal. So if you lose a day up front, it may take you 6 days to get the logistics chain functioning in the same way, maybe longer. So none of this is written in stone. There could be a settlement tomorrow because the power of a strike is it focuses the mind on both sides. For workers, they're giving up income, but they believe they're doing it and they're very motivated to do it right now because it will ensure their future. For the companies involved, they may be looking at giving a more generous settlement now, or taking 2 more weeks of strike and giving an even more generous settlement than they would have right now. So with that in mind, there is, after both sides get a sense of where they are, possibility over the next week, 10 days at the outset, that both sides could swallow hard. The Employers Association, the Maritime Alliance, upping what they're going to give on wages considerably from the 50%, and the union swallowing hard, perhaps, on not getting the full 77% they're demanding, and getting less in several other areas as well. That's the nature of collective bargaining. It does work, but the strike focuses the mind. You either pay now, you may not like it, or you'll pay more later, and you have the cost of the strike.
If it does go the full 5, 6, God forbid, even longer weeks more than just 1 or 2, what is your message for consumers? How long will it take things to ship? I mean, you talked about prices potentially going up, the inflation that could result from those shortages and from the tightened supply chain. But what else could we see? We have the holiday shopping season weighing upon us. There's an Amazon Prime Day coming up. What does this mean over the next month for shopping in the United States?
It will be a mixed picture. I don't foresee a 6-week strike. I think this is going to be much shorter than that, but no one knows, and things can become unpredictable. But when it comes to Christmas shopping, that's one of the areas that's a bright spot, strike or no strike, because these are overwhelmingly are non-perishable goods. Clothing, appliances, some other things have all been stockpiled. Things that may be given as gifts, retailers have a lot in stock. They've paid that price already. So it will be much less disruptive and visible in that sense. Yeah, you won't be eating bananas after about a week on the East Coast, or other fruit perhaps. But the pressure on the supply chain, as I mentioned, causes prices to go up. And that feeds into inflation, and that starts all kinds of other dynamics. But the administration is well aware of this and putting a huge effort in many different ways to get this settled. It's not visible, but it's very much there. So that could likely mean shorter rather than longer.
See, that banana shortage that you mentioned, it sounds so minor, but in my family, we eat a banana every morning for breakfast. So I'm about to go to the grocery store and buy a bunch just to freeze and to have, because I think we're athletic. We need the potassium. But Harley, we've talked about a lot. Is there anything else that's on your mind that the Forbes audience should know as it relates to this strike and how it could go?
Absolutely. One thing, this strike isn't occurring in a vacuum. We have seen an upsurge of popularity for unions. The most recent Gallup poll indicates that 70% of Americans have a favorable opinion of unions. Of American workers between 18 and 30, that jumps to 90%. These are near record or record numbers. We've seen in the last several years some major negotiations that have resulted in very positive benefits for workers in those industries. The Teamsters at UPS won a very strong settlement because UPS resisted to the last minute and then made that decision, we're either going to pay now or pay more later, and gave in to a generous settlement. At the UAW, there was a 40-day strike among a new innovative stand-up strike where not all the three Detroit automakers were shut down, but that resulted in a record contract and a lot of benefits. Well, you might say, great for union members. Yes, but both of these settlements, among others, have spread through the economy. So in the auto industry, Toyota, Nissan, even Tesla, all non-union, and most of the others raised wages and benefits, not to be the same, but much higher than they would have been without this. This was the union avoidance impact. So you have that kind of thing. And we forget it isn't just workers earning a fair share for themselves. That puts purchasing power into the economy. And purchasing power causes the economy to grow and gives us a healthier economic climate. So while this is tough at the moment, and while the disruption of the strike is potentially real and damaging, we shouldn't forget that unions play an important role in this economy. And over time, post-World War II, a strong growth of the labor movement resulted in a middle class in this country and resulted in benefits all Americans, union and non-union alike, enjoy. And that's not a partisan observation. There were former secretaries of labor, such as the noted Republican George P. Shultz, who would have agreed with that analysis.
Harley Shaiken, thank you so much for coming on and breaking down everything we need to know about this dock workers strike. We so appreciate your time and your insight.
Thank you.